The UK puts new Brexit checks on hold. Yeah, again. Because if Brexit were a TV series, border checks would be that recurring character who keeps getting written out, then teased for a dramatic return, only to vanish again just before the episode ends. And this time, it's the fresh fruit and vegetables that are getting a last minute reprieve as the UK government decides to hit the pause button, yet again, on introducing full sanitary and phytosanitary checks at the border, while simultaneously teasing a new deal with Brussels that, if all goes to plan, would make those checks entirely unnecessary. The magic acronym on everyone's lips this time is SPS, short for sanitary and phytosanitary, which is a bureaucratic way of saying rules for food and plants that stop you from importing disease along with your salad. The UK and EU, in a rare moment of post-divorce civility, recently agreed to begin negotiations on an SPS agreement that would align Britain's rules with those of the European Union and thereby eliminate the need for some of the very border controls that Brexit had promised to liberate the country from implementing in the first place. In the meantime, the government has announced that the next set of checks, those affected so-called medium-risk fruits and vegetables, will not be rolled out as scheduled. They've been delayed, deferred, postponed, shoved into the bureaucratic long grass, and now penciled in for January 31st, 2027, which is basically the political version of let's never speak of this again. And the reasoning, once again, is disruption. Disruption to supply chains, disruption to costs, disruption to the basic business of getting tomatoes, lettuce, and strawberries across the channel without creating queues, paperwork mountains, or sudden price spikes that leave voters wondering why their weekly shop now costs more than their mortgage. And industry groups are predictably thrilled. The Fresh Produce Consortium called the delay a common sense move, and considering the alternative was £200 million in extra costs dumped onto the food sector, you can understand their enthusiasm. And one can only imagine the sigh of relief from wholesalers and supermarket logistics teams who were otherwise bracing for another round of Brexit-induced chaos. And if this all feels like a déjà vu, it's because it is. These border checks have been delayed multiple times already, for years in fact, bouncing from one target date to the next like a cursed calendar event that no one actually wants to see arrive. Back in April 2024, the Conservatives finally managed to implement some checks on meat, fish, dairy, and other high-risk animal products, but the fresh produce rules were still kept on ice. And then Labour took over, postponed the October deadline to July, and now, as we blink into June 2025, it's been kicked even further down the road. And why? Because reality, dear viewers, has once again refused to comply with Brexit slogans. Turns out, taking back control is much harder when that control comes with customs forms, inspection facilities, increased costs, and the looming threat of empty supermarket shelves. And now, here's the twist. Labour isn't just delaying checks. They are actively working toward an SPS deal that could eliminate the need for them altogether. And which, if you're keeping score, means the UK could end up voluntarily aligning with the very EU standards it once voted to escape, only this time without a seat at the table where those rules are made. It's like storming out of a restaurant in protest of the menu, then sneaking back into the kitchen to eat the same dish, just with less dignity and a longer waiting time. Biosecurity Minister Susan Heyman framed the move as a masterstroke of pragmatism, claiming it will make food cheaper, slash bureaucracy, and remove cumbersome border controls. She called it part of Labour's plan for change, which sounds inspiring until you realize that the change in question is mostly undoing parts of Brexit that never worked in the first place. And the irony is hard to miss. One of the defining promises of Brexit was that Britain would gain the freedom to write its own rules. But in practice, that freedom has often come at a cost, economic, diplomatic, and logistical, and nowhere has this been clearer than in the slow, painful saga of food and plant border checks. Now, in an almost Shakespearean twist, the very freedoms Brexit delivered are being put back in the box, tied up with a red ribbon that says alignment, because businesses, voters, and even governments have discovered that divergence can be expensive, confusing, and occasionally catastrophic. And so, after nearly a decade of debates, negotiations, walkouts, slogans, and spin, the UK government now finds itself negotiating a way back into regulatory alignment with the EU, not to rejoin, of course, but simply to make the trains run on time and the letters arrive before it wilts. This isn't just policy, it's theater. Because every delay, every recalibration, every new plan is just another act in the great Brexit play, in which every character eventually circles back to the same stage, muttering the same lines, only with different lighting and a slightly revised costume. And as we look ahead to 2027, yes, 2027, for the maybe implementation of checks that were supposed to begin in 2021, it becomes clear that this isn't delay for delay's sake. It's a tacit admission that the UK's post-Brexit food strategy only functions when it closely resembles the pre-Brexit one. Because Europe isn't just Britain's neighbor. It's where the tomatoes come from. So will those Brexit border checks ever be implemented? Maybe. Will they ever be needed? Hopefully not, if the SPS deal goes through. Will anyone in government admit that this is effectively a return to the regulatory status quo with less influence and more paperwork? Definitely not. But the truth is as ripe as a Spanish orange. The UK can either check every apple at the border or quietly realign with Brussels and pretend it was the plan all along. And right now, Labour is betting that voters would rather have cheap fruit than ideological purity. In the end, Brexit was supposed to be about freedom. And now, ironically, it's freedom that has to be delayed again in order to keep the letters fresh. And I don't mean it in the way you might remember. But bon appetit, Britain. We'll see you at the next delay. And if you want to see another video right now, the next one is right here in the end screen.